the time. This is 1010 Wins. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world.
Good morning. 64 degrees at 8 o'clock. It's Tuesday, September 11th. I'm Lee Harris. Here's what's happening. It's primary day, and the polls are open in New York City. Voters are deciding among about 250 candidates for mayor, city council, and assorted other positions.
Get ready for the second coming of Air Jordan. Michael Jordan has all but confirmed his return to the NBA. I'm Alice Stockton-Rossini. I'll have that story coming up.
We remember it was a beautiful day. It was sunny, blue skies. I want to say it was in the 60s, which is, an incredible September day.
I remember going to teach a health class and had a full class, and all of a sudden I remember
Father Parks, who was the president at the time, got on the loudspeaker and announced that
a plane had hit the World Trade Center.
Everybody was just looking at one another like, what is happening? And then immediately I thought it was an accident. Something must have happened accidentally, a plane flew in. Nobody thought about any kind of premeditation, any kind of terrorism at all. It was just, I thought it was an accident, and he came on the loudspeaker, he said it, and we were kind of shocked. But I think then we just started moving on with class. And, people were just looking at one another, and I was like, it was just an accident, and everything's okay, and, it'll be fine.
Right. So you're trying to reassure them that this is not a big deal.
Correct.
Because no one really knew.
Right, and what does that mean, a plane flew into the World Trade Center? What does that mean? Where? What happened?
Yeah.
We didn't get any details, that's all we got, so I was trying to downplay it, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what's happening? This isn't, how does a plane fly into a building?
Fordham Prep is not located in Lower Manhattan, but on the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University in the Bronx, 13 miles north of the Twin Towers. With no permanent televisions in the classrooms, no smartphones, and the computer center the only place to access the internet, it was Father Parks' second announcement that informed the majority of the school that a second plane had hit the South Tower, and that what to those in the building yet to see any images of the day, a horrific accident, was actually intentional, calculated devastation. I myself listened with my class on a borrowed radio to the chaos and confusion unfolding just a few express train stops downtown.
I remember running down to the ministry center because there were TVs in the ministry center. And that's when the Today Show was on, and there were a bunch of faculty members in the ministry center watching TV. And that's when I saw the planes going through the towers. And I just could not believe it. Nobody was speaking.
As the scale of the tragedy became clear amongst the Fordham Prep faculty, a simple question presented itself. One asked by teachers at every New York City school that day.
There was a final announcement that said everybody should report to the Commons. And in the Commons, everybody in the school seemed to be down there. They had pulled out a TV. People were watching the burning buildings down in Manhattan. Everybody was huddled around the screen. And as crazy as it sounds, when you had lots and lots of kids in the Commons, there was almost nobody talking. Everybody was quietly watching the TV screen because they couldn't kind of really believe what they were seeing.
But at 9:59, the faculty in the ministry center watched in silence as the South Tower collapsed.
Outside in the Commons, kids were panicking. Parents were calling. They wanted to take their kids out of school. There were some kids whose parents worked in the towers, and so they were panicking. So it was kind of it was kind of chaotic at that point. The
Prep's normal school day was over. 1,000 students who came to the Bronx on trains, buses, in cars, and on subways had to get home. But bridges and tunnels into the city were shut, and public transportation was suspended by 10:30 a.m. And in 2001, students with their own cell phones were not the norm. And even for those with them, cell towers were jammed with calls across the city.
Now we would know everything. You know, we'd see it on social media, we'd see it on Twitter or whatever it was, and we'd know all the information fairly instantly. But at that time, we didn't really know that much.
At the apex of this logistical nightmare was a small population of students whose parents worked in Lower Manhattan. Amidst chaos, faculty members and administrators set aside their role as educators to face the practical problems of evacuating their students by whatever means necessary, without losing track of any of them.
It's funny how, like, memories. I don't know. I was downstairs in the commons, and I remember Patricia Morris with a couple other teachers, and we were helping sign people out. Kids were leaving, and it was just that constant, everyone trying to keep track of who's leaving, who's staying, who has a place to go.
Parents were driving down to the prep and offering any student who lived nearby a ride home. Unwilling to let the process devolve into a free-for-all, the administration made a point of confirming when and how every student left the building. Faculty manned sign-out stations throughout the commons, sorting students by where they lived. When public transportation eventually reopened, faculty members who got to the prep that way left for their neighborhoods, with students in tow.
Section off groups, like if you're in Yonkers, come over here. If you need to take a public bus home, come over here. If someone's picking you up, come over here. So they were kind of organizing students, I guess, at that point. I know now, I wasn't exactly sure at that point, for dismissal. And they just wanted to make sure everybody had a way of getting home.
I was trying to hold it together. I had already gotten in touch with, my kids were small. This was 20 years ago. I had, Steph was 10 and Alex was 7 and Matt was 4. So I knew my parents, had gotten them from school. They were home. Everything was good. My husband was fine. So I said, I'm going to be here trying to help.
A teacher at the time, Kevin Cronin, and I were scheduled for, I can't remember, one of the buses. And in essence, we were collecting all the students who took a certain bus, I believe, back to Westchester home. And we were there just to tell them that bus probably wasn't going to be coming, and that they were going to need to call parents or somebody else to possibly pick them up in the morning to get them home. When I left, and I was not one of the last teachers here, I was here for a pretty long time that day, there was probably 30 or 40 kids left with a group of teachers who were still, I guess, looking into how they were going to get home. Teachers basically waited, definitely a good number of teachers waited in the building until every single kid had either gotten home through public transportation or had been picked up in some means, from that day.
I remember thinking, I will never forget that this is the room that I was in when 9/11 happened, and these are the kids that were in my classroom. And I remember also feeling kind of a responsibility to those kids to kind of, in a way, keep them safe and not incite any kind of fear and kind of talk about things so that they weren't frightened. Because, they were, 13, 14 years old?
Yeah. In the immediate aftermath of September 11th, faculty were tasked not just with getting back to education, but with shepherding their students through the days that followed.
And then a kid to jug wasn't that important, and making sure a kid was dressed for gym was not that important. It was having a reality check that, families had lost significant members of their families and that they were going to be struggling.
Part of leading their students through the following months called upon the school's Ignatian roots. The faculty challenged their students to question what was happening to them and around them. Most importantly, they encouraged their students to be aware, to be mindful, and to be grateful for the lives that their parents, families, and countless others had secured for them.
I started every class with, how's everybody doing? Is there anything that people want to add or talk about that maybe happened to them over the last couple of days? And again, I didn't go too deeply into it. I wasn't too sure how much people were ready to start talking about the experience, it being so fresh. But I do remember starting a lot of my classes with, how's everyone feeling? Are we all okay here? Before we move on to something at that time, academics, that seemed so much less important than what was going on that week.
Fordham Prep is like a family. It really is, with the faculty and the students and everyone. It was about supporting each other and being here for each other.
But I thought also it was important to get back to being around your friends, being around your classmates, having that support, especially for those students that were affected.
Some of the kids that left my room that day, they were getting called to the office because their parents had died in the building. They didn't know that at that moment, and that haunts me to this day.
Oh my God, there's two poor freshmen who lost their fathers. And I remember thinking, these kids don't even know us yet. They don't know Fordham Prep, they don't know us, and to go through that a few days into the school year.
Of the people who lived through September 11th at Fordham Prep, 30 are still here teaching, and 8 members of the school's staff are still working in the building, including 2 who were students in 2001. How do you talk about September 11th with boys who did not live through this?
Yeah, it is very tricky. I compare it to when my dad talked to me about Pearl Harbor and hear him at home hearing it on the radio that the naval base in Hawaii had been bombed and how everybody couldn't believe it. People were running out into the streets and saying, "Did you hear what was on the radio?" And to him it was historical, but it was also emotional. And that's the way 9/11 was for me. But to teach or to ask the kids around every September 11th, and I do bring it up around September 11th with my classes, to them it's much more of a history lesson than it is an emotional lesson, I think. I try to convey to them the craziness of that day and how we were all nervous and we were all confused. And they know about 9/11, but they know about it from reading about it, not having experienced it viscerally. So they are curious. I would say anytime we talk about 9/11 near the anniversary of 9/11, they love to ask me questions, and it's never the questions that you can find on the internet. It's more like, what did you guys do? Were classes canceled? How did you get home? So now they're curious about the little details that, having lived through it, you would have experienced, but maybe, Wikipedia or something's not going to tell people about, so it's, but they are curious all these years later.
The school day ended on September 11th as the student body whittled down to just a few, waiting for a particular subway to open up. As the sun was setting, members of the faculty and staff who had stuck around to see their students get home made their way to the roof, where the Manhattan skyline is just visible, and watched the smoke rise from where the towers once stood. Just after 7 p.m., the last group of students left Rose Hill, led by a teacher to the reopened D train. The remaining faculty made their way home to face the rest of the day through the iconic and terrible images that have come to represent September 11th to the world. At Fordham Prep, September 11th is a day linked forever to the history of the school and the memory of those who lived through it here together.
And like I said before, I think of some of the families. I know the Duffy family. He was Chris Duffy, 96. He was in my freshman mentor group. And I had another student, I think it was Pat O'Shea was the last. He had a dad and an uncle who passed away that day. So I think of those people because those are the people that, obviously those families suffered a lot on that day.
Coming in. And I remember with Tony Pantieri, that first night of 9/11, I knew his wife worked in the towers actually. And I called him, and that wasn't something I normally did, but I called Tony on that Tuesday night, to find out what's going on, are you okay?
Did he answer the phone?
He did.
He did.
He did. And I remember him saying, I had a lot of people, a lot of friends looking, searching hospitals, but we haven't heard anything.